Syrians are marching in cities like Aleppo, Daraa, Banyas, and Homs, calling for freedom and regime change. So far, more than 750 demonstrators are believed to have been killed as part of a government crackdown, while 8,000 are thought to have been detained. This story is one which is particularly interesting because the mainstream media has not had the opportunity to tell the tale of what's going on, because a lot of journalists have either been kicked out, have been detained, or have not been allowed to enter into the city or into the country. Right. Because of that, social media is playing an increasingly important role, and as always, social media finds ways or people, and I would put it in this way, context as citizen media. Right. Citizens find ways of telling their stories in their own special voice. In this particular instance, we see an image, and this tweet says that these are people armed with roses. You know, we've been hearing a lot of talk that these are terrorist forces. President Bashar al-Assad is saying that these are armed terrorists. Well, this tweet is countering that, saying that no, the protesters are armed only with flowers in this particular instance. Right. I thought that was very powerful. And a more controversial image, this is someone claiming that this is Bashar the Butcher, and there's a small thing at the bottom right of the screen that says, "Welcome to Syria." Now, all of this has been happening because we've seen a lot of people hurt, a number of people injured, but folks are using very innovative ways of telling these stories and uploading videos, and one of those platforms is something called Crowdvoice. This is a video that was used or sent to us via Crowdvoice that basically shows people protesting right there in a Syrian city, and you'll notice the image of Bashar al-Assad coming up. As you can see, as we zoom in, there is the image of Bashar al-Assad. Now, I point this out in particular because a lot of people have been saying that, okay, this is imagery that is created from other places. It's Bahrain, it's Yemen, it's not Syria. But we're finding these large posters of Bashar al-Assad. If people go to our website, stream.aljazeera.com, we've got more footage of images that are very clearly coming out of Syria. Joining us now via Skype is Esra Al-Shafai. She's the co-founder of Crowdvoice, the platform we were just discussing. It's a grassroots digital network that leverages new media to fight oppression. We're not going to show her face for security reasons, but Esra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us really quickly, what kind of things has Crowdvoice been sharing about Syria in particular?
So Crowdvoice in general crowdsources various types of content, anything from blog posts, news articles, videos, tweets, and images about a particular subject. In the case of Syria, a lot of people have been using it to contribute and discover content, especially on-the-ground eyewitness accounts, just like what you have showed, and showing clear accounts of brutality and violence against protesters.
Now, I have a question here, because one of the things that always comes up when we think about citizen journalism is the issue of verification. And there have been some reasonable claims made that maybe all of the footage cannot be verified. How do you respond to that?
So Crowdvoice is crowdsourced, and that means that the tool relies on the public for approval and moderation of the videos. For example, you're someone who logs into Crowdvoice, you say, okay, this is not really verifiable, maybe this didn't happen in Syria. You have the power of voting whether or not this content gets to stay on the page. However, something interesting has been happening in the case of Syria, where activists themselves who are taking the videos often name the date, the place, and sometimes a description of what's happening around them, and also showing the landmarks that show the authenticity of the location, proving that this is in fact happening right now or today within Syria.
And that video that we just showed is apparently from the city of Hama. And basically, as Esra is saying, people are finding their own ways of verifying it. You know, I'm interested in your thoughts on this, Catherine, because it's a controversial issue. If mainstream media can't get into Syria, citizen media is all we have. How do we balance the different voices that are coming out of that Syrian media?
Well, I think it's really interesting, particularly the time and date. It reminds me of those old techniques of having people show pictures of the newspaper of that day as a way of verifying the time and date of the photograph. As far as how you sort of verify it, I think that one of the things that Isra is talking about is so valuable, which is you have people who know the country, who know the city, who are able to say, okay, this is something that we recognize this to be true, we recognize that location in which this is happening, and then you know, people, oh God, please.
No, please.
Yeah, no, the supporters on either side are the ones who are responsible for getting those voices out in the absence of professional media.
Esra, I want to ask you one final question before we let you go. For those that argue that, you know, projects like Crowdvoice are supporting radicals or people who are trying to undermine these regimes. How would you respond to those kinds of allegations?
The allegations of them supporting, such as people.
Basically, we see that President Assad has said that these are armed terrorists, that they're not pro-democracy protesters, but they're actually people who are seeking to undermine the regime itself, and not for democratic reasons.
I think that's what's so important about actually providing access to these videos. The reason why there is a media blackout is that you only hear that part of the story and not what people are actually struggling to bring out. I mean, people, despite the media blackout, I mean, some people have been using even Jordanian networks to try and access and upload material into YouTube, and that has been so valuable because it just shows the eyewitness accounts, brutality, violence against clearly unarmed protesters. And the thing what makes Crowdvoice so powerful is that we can, for example, send this to anyone who claims otherwise and show them that this is evidence that cannot really be disputed. And I think projects like Crowdvoice gives such people a very hard time to say, well, these are, violent terrorists, and it just allows them to just see them for themselves, that these are evidently unarmed, and it's very difficult for them to justify what's going on, which we see in these videos.
And Sarat, thank you so much for joining us and for giving us some additional information about what Crowdvoice does and the impact it's having in Syria. We appreciate your contribution.
Thanks for having me.
Ahmed.
I just want to mention something she touched on, which is how powerful social media can be and why it's in fact powerful. What we saw in Egypt is that the fear factor finally was broken. Mm-hmm. And the reason I reference this is because we have a tweet that came in just as Esra was talking from Yel Zait, which says the main problem of the Syrian revolution is the hesitation of Syrian public opinion. I think social media is playing a main role. So when the media is not there, many people rely on sites like this right here, which is, referencing all these videos and really showing what's going on in the streets to kind of coerce people who might have similar aspirations, that don't be afraid anymore.
And that idea of people losing that fear, I think, is really important.